A few weeks ago, I did a video listing 10 movies that, despite being well-known, were difficult to find legally on any streaming service or even on disc. Those titles ranged from Ron Howard's Cocoon to movies like Dawn of the Dead, the original. In the comments, many of our readers chimed in with their 2 cents on films they found difficult to find over the years. So here are 10 more challenging to find flicks, some of which may really surprise you. Number 1 on the list is Dogma. Now, unlike other movies, there's a legitimate reason why Dogma is so hard to find, and it goes back to the complicated way it was initially released in 1999. Kevin Smith's film was originally made for Miramax. The company that Disney owned at the time became worried about the risk of releasing a film deemed blasphemous. So the heads of Miramax, Harvey and Bob Weinstein, released the film on their own through Lionsgate, meaning they own the rights to it. With Harvey Weinstein now in prison, the former mogul has been holding on to the rights in a vain attempt to do something with the property to raise money. With him no longer on speaking terms with his brother Bob and Kevin Smith vowing never to associate with the Weinsteins again, I wouldn't hold out my breath for a re-release unless the rights are somehow pried from the Weinstein brothers' control. Number 2. Shoot to Kill. The late great Sidney Poitier stars in this underrated action thriller from 1987. In it, he plays an FBI agent on the trail of a serial killer. He's forced to chase his prey into the remote Pacific Northwest, where he's infiltrated a hiking group led by a woman played by Kirstie Alley, whose boyfriend, Tom Berenger, is an expert tracker. To save her, the agent and the tracker must team up in classic mismatched buddy fashion to track down the killer. What's cool about this one is that all the men on the hike with Alley are played by guys who played villains before, including Clancy Brown, Richard Mazur, Andrew Robinson, so you never know who the killer really is. This was a Touchstone Pictures release, so Disney owns the rights. It is out on DVD but has never been issued on Blu-ray, and it's unavailable on any of Disney's streaming services, not even on Star in Canada, which has a lot of the Touchstone films. Of all the movies on this list, this is the one I'm most eager to see get re-released, as it's a total gem. It's Sidney Poitier's only real-deal action movie, and despite being in his 60s at the time, he did many of his own stunts. His chemistry with Tom Berenger also, and this is really good. Next up, one that you can still kind of find but only in very compromised form, The Devils by Ken Russell. Now this movie has an infamous history that explains why it's never been released on disc in North America. It's an X-rated surreal account of a Catholic priest, played by Oliver Reed, who's burned at the stake as a witch due to the hysterical accusations of a lusty, hunchback, maniacal nun, played by Vanessa Redgrave. In the UK, this is more of a cult movie, so you can find it on disc, and it does occasionally show up in the US on the Criterion channel, but only in a dated transfer of the censored R-rated cut that was pulled off a Laserdisc. Warner Brothers, who owns the rights, has seemingly always been terrified of this film, so they won't license it out despite interest from the Criterion Collection and many other labels. Next up is the Cannonball Run. You'd think the third most popular film of 1981 and one that spawned 2 sequels would be easier to find, and if you grew up in the 80s, the Cannonball Run was everywhere, as the cast was jam-packed, with it including Burt Reynolds, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Farrah Fawcett, and even Jackie Chan. It's about an illegal cross-country race and was a major blockbuster in its time. This one isn't available because it was financed independently, while the sequels, which you can find pretty easily, were not. One interesting thing about this movie is that Roger Moore plays a man who believes he's, well, Roger Moore, or rather James Bond. Eon Pictures were so upset that they included a clause in all future 007 contracts that the actors could never wear a tuxedo in non-Bond projects while under contract to the company. Moore himself had mixed feelings about the film, as one of the women who plays his companions in the movie, stuntwoman Heidi von Beltz, was left quadriplegic after a controversial accident during shooting. This is available on DVD from HBO, and that was released in the 90s, but it looks terrible. Next up is Wired, the controversial dramatization of Bob Woodward's infamous account of John Belushi's final days, which was roundly attacked by his friends back in 1989. Michael Chiklis plays Belushi in a performance that nearly ended his career, until at least he landed the role in the series The Commish a few years later. Fans of Belushi's took the movie so poorly that Dan Aykroyd actually had co-star J.T. Walsh blocked from a role in one of his movies years later because he was so upset that he had been in this film. That said, the story has a happy ending, as Chiklis, who's gone on to a pretty great career, ran into James Belushi, John's brother, years later in a bar. He said the two had a drink and officially buried the hatchet after Chiklis apologized for taking a role in a movie that the family found hurtful. Of all the films on this list, maybe this is the only one that deserves the forced obscurity it's found itself in. And its release kinda serves no one. Also, it's a pretty bad movie. Next up is Ricochet. This 1992 action film was an early attempt to turn Denzel Washington into an action star. Despite stylish direction by Russell Mulcahy and an unforgettable turn by John Lithgow as the movie's villain, it was only a modest success at the box office. Still, you'd think Ricochet would have a decent release, but it only exists in a poor quality DVD from the 90s. There is an HD rip of it floating around out there that was taken off Cinemax, but it's in the wrong aspect ratio. Next is Freaked. This cult hit was a passion project for Bill and Ted star Alex Winter. It barely got released by 20th Century Fox, but it built up enough notoriety over the years that it came out on DVD and Blu-ray via Anchor Bay, only for it to go out of print in recent years. It's also not streaming. PCU. This college comedy has a unique leading man, with it an early role for Jeremy Piven as the head of a frat house who takes on the politically correct culture at his university. Sound a little ahead of its time? Perhaps the subject matter and the fact that Piven struggled to come back in recent years following sexual misconduct accusations, which he has always denied, is one of the reasons it's not available anywhere, except on DVD. Next is a real cult classic, Blood In, Blood Out. Taylor Hackford's Chicano epic was a huge flop in 1993, but became a major cult classic once it hit VHS, which makes its absence from Blu-ray and streaming puzzling, as it could easily make a ton of money. But the fact that it's owned by Disney means it's probably way down on their list of priorities. But it would be cool if a company like Kino Lorber could give this one a nice Blu-ray upgrade. And finally, a really shocking, strange one, 28 Days Later. Danny Boyle's classic 28 Days Later is currently out of print on Blu-ray and isn't available on streaming. Of any movie on this list, this is arguably the easiest to find, as you can get Marketplace Blu-rays, but why isn't it in print? One can only assume Disney has huge plans for it in the future, with Danny Boyle recently announcing that he was going to be making another movie in this series. The sequel, 28 Weeks Later, is widely available. So let us know in the comments, as always, if I've missed anything and what you'd like to see highlighted next time we do a video like this.
Thank you.